Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, I am so delighted that you are here, and I am really excited to tell you that the Grace and Grit podcast is now back in production of new episodes. If you've been listening along through the summer, you know that we launched a summer remix series of some of our most popular episodes. And the reason we did that was because, number one, we wanted the really good past content to make sure it got into listeners' ears. But we also wanted to take a pause from the podcast to kind of reevaluate what we were producing, how we were doing it, and most importantly, how to give you, the listener, the most incredible listener experience. And so, as we move forward with new episodes of the show, for an undisclosed amount of time, because I just honestly don't know how long we will stay in this cadence, we are going to commit to dropping bi-weekly episodes. So every other week, you can expect a brand new episode of the Grace and Grit podcast. And the reason I'm committing to that cadence is because I feel like it will give me an opportunity to, number one, protect my energy, because I have a lot of other projects I'm committed to, and I'm still very much committed to this show. So it allows me to continue to show up and produce high quality content, and also give you the opportunity to listen fully to the episodes, because I do realize that we have so many in the bank now that it can feel like you're consistently trying to catch up. And I do not want this to be one more thing in your life that gives you an opportunity to get into a state of overwhelm. So, with all that being said, those of you who have been longtime listeners know, because I have talked about this pretty prolifically throughout the Grace and Grit podcast, a little bit about my history and how I have gotten to this place in my career of talking about self-leadership within the health arena, and more specifically with midlife women. And for those of you who might be newer, I just want to kind of give you a quick summary of that, because it is pertinent and valuable to understanding the importance of today's episode. So I started my career in the movement space. I was a professional dancer, and I had been doing a lot of personal training, and specifically Pilates training, as a part of my own dancing development. And when I was looking to make more money, it made a whole lot of sense that I go into something that I had experience with and that I really enjoyed doing. So the world of movement exposed me to so many things in the wellness industry. And perhaps most notably, it really highlighted the ignorance that I had around all the things that it takes to create a state of deep health. So as much as I adore movement, and I actually really enjoy teaching people how to be better movers, I also felt really hungry to better understand how to improve the health of a human, because movement alone is not enough. So I went on to get nutrition education. I went on to better understand the impact that our total stress load has on our biology, and really started to embrace the idea that the most fundamental thing we need to focus on to improve our health story, mentally, physically, or otherwise, is to manage the total stress load that we are carrying at any time. And unpacking stress looks like a whole lot of different things, which is why nobody's health journey is going to look the same. Everyone's journey will look very different. And that knowledge led me to getting very passionate about teaching women how to navigate their own healing process? How do we organize our life and maneuver our way through life in a way that keeps us in integrity with ourselves and helps us to unpack our specific stressors? And so that's kind of where I have landed, and in it's the space of really teaching people those self-leadership skills. But I'm telling you all of this, but because what became so crystal clear to me along the pathway to helping people improve health was the power of the nervous system. At the root of every function in the human body is the nervous system. And the nervous system is something I hope you are starting to see more information about. There is certainly a larger conversation starting to be had on this topic. But for most people, it's a pretty new conversation. We didn't really hear a lot about nervous system health, in biology class, through school. We didn't hear a lot about the nervous system as we kind of dove into our own health journey as adults. And the more we are learning about it, and the more people are really starting to nurture their nervous system, beautiful things are being born of that. And I always give credit where credit is due. Irene Lyon, who is my guest on the show today, is someone who I tribute with really helping me to better understand the impact that the nervous system has on our well-being. And so I'm really happy to say that we are here to have another conversation today. If you have listened to the Grace and Grit podcast for a long time, you are very familiar with Irene Lyon because she has been on the show so many times. She is absolutely the most frequented guest of this show, and that is very intentional. Nervous system work, if we don't do it, if we don't understand it, if we don't start to acknowledge the power of the nervous system, it is quite literally impossible to create a state of deep health. So I think that the information she has is just so, so important. I will give you full disclosure here. I always do. I am an affiliate of one program in the world, and it happens to be Irene Lyon's program. And the reason I'm an affiliate is because I have known her now for nearly a decade. And I signed up for her program, I believe it was about 4 years ago for the first time. Her full program, Smart Body, Smart Mind, which is a 12-week self-led program. And what I have learned in that program has affected me so much as a woman, as a person, as a human being, as a teacher, as an educator, certainly as a coach. And so I'm so passionate about the information in that program and helping to spread that message far and wide, that when Irene asked me if I wanted to be an affiliate, I was like, definitely sign me up, because I was already promoting the course throughout the year. So if you like what you hear on the episode today, and you are someone who is feeling the itch to deepen your own understanding of the nervous system and the role that it plays in our health story, I would strongly encourage you to check out Irene's program, which only launches once or twice a year. She is launching twice this year, so the course is opening September 12th through September 19th of 2023. So this episode is launching very strategically a few weeks before the program starts, because I want to give you an opportunity to get registered if it's something that you feel called to. So if you want to check out the details of the program, you can go to graceandgrit.com/smart body, smart mind. Once again, graceandgrit.com/smart body, smart mind. Now, Irene and I, in all the conversations that we've had on this show, we have covered a lot of ground around what the nervous system is and how it impacts our health, and even how it influences our ability to create lasting behavior change. So today, we decided we would take a slightly different angle and really start to lean into the conversation around the interplay between nervous system health and exercise. Because I think most people have an understanding that too much exercise can absolutely be a hindrance to nervous system health. It can dysregulate the nervous system. But exercise can also help to regulate the nervous system. So in our conversation today, we really start to explore the dynamic between finding that sweet spot between overdoing it and not doing it at all, and really just exploring some of the really frequent questions that come up around the space between nervous system health and exercise. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I really loved actually doing the interview so much. And once again, if you like what you hear and you want to do a deeper dive into Irene's work, graceandgrit.com/smart body, smart mind. And the last thing I'll say here before we get into the interview is that I do offer 6 months of free membership to my own Rumble and Rise community for every person who signs up for the Smart Body, Smart Mind program. And the reason I do that is because I think that the work that we do in Rumble and Rise so beautifully aligns with nervous system healing. And so I give participants an opportunity to do both. So if you sign up for Irene's program, you will have 6 months to activate your free 6-month membership. So if that is kind of giving you a little bit more incentive, go check out that page, graceandgrit.com/smart body, smart mind. Okay, without further ado, let's get into this conversation. I hope you love it as much as I enjoyed conducting it. Irene Lyon, welcome back to the Grace and Grit podcast.
Miss Courtney Townley, hello. Thank you for having me.
Hi, it's always great to have you here.
Yes.
For listeners who may not know you, who may not be familiar with the amazing work you do in the world, what would you like them to know from the outset of this conversation today?
Whoa.
I know that's a loaded question.
My name is Irene.
Yes, it is. It's a good start.
I live in British Columbia, Canada.
Yeah.
I am someone who has been learning about the human body since 1993.
So for a minute.
And, it was really my first entry point, which I haven't mentioned. I loved biology 12, like high school, our senior year. And it was the biology. I didn't like the plant stuff and looking at insects and
the dissection of the frog.
I didn't dig that stuff. I'm like, okay, but I loved learning about like the digestive system.
Yeah.
I loved learning about how the kidneys worked and the circulatory system. And our teacher was great. I still remember his name, Mr. Lismore. He was amazing. He loved biology. And I took to it, like I really got it.
Yeah.
So that was cool. My parents are both retired veterinarians. So I also was brought up in the medical world of animal care. So that was another thing. But what really propelled me into studying the human body were my own injuries downhill skiing, snow skiing. And we don't have to go into all the details there, but needless to say, I've had many surgeries, many orthopedic surgeries. I'm actually waiting on another one in August to get a staple removed from my tibia from a surgery that happened in like 1995.
Okay.
And it's bugging me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that's where it started. I got interested in exercise, rehabilitation, and fitness because of these injuries, because I didn't have to, Courtney, but for whatever reason, my system, my essence wanted to study, how does my body work? How can I learn about it? And let's go into this. So I went into exercise science for my undergrad.
Yeah.
And that led me into the world of sports performance. I've had I don't know if it's a luxury, but the blessing of working with high-level athletes. When I was what one consider a high-level athlete, I was a high-level skier, rock climbed, mountaineered stuff, paraglided, all these things.
Yeah.
And got really injured from another knee injury. And that led me into the world of mind body, because everything I learned in my like 10 to 13 years of post-secondary education did not help me recover my body.
Yeah.
That was a big wake-up call. And what that led me to is the work of Feldenkrais and human developmental movement patterns and how we get stuck in patterns. And that was my first kind of humbling experience to not everything they teach in university is everything we need to know. There's more out there. So I studied this stuff called the Feldenkrais method, totally transformed my body, loved it, became practiced in it and practitioner in it, private practice, very successful practice, teaching groups, workshops, ski teams, whole 9 yards. And then I then stumbled into this world of trauma and stored, I like to call it stored survival stress. And you know that lingo from being in one of my courses. And it was like, holy cow, I now have another piece that I'm completely ignorant to. And that is how events that rock our world and put us into what we would call PTSD, complex PTSD, how they limit our ability to be physically well and to maybe recover from an injury. I recovered from my injuries because my injuries were not embedded in early trauma. But a lot of people, their injuries don't recover because their early trauma is keeping them from recovering at the physical level. So that's a long way of saying I got into this trauma work, which is called somatic experiencing. It's the work of Peter Levine that blew open my world to a world that when I look back in 2008, when I got into this, I had no clue where it was going to guide me or lead me. And went into that work for myself, not for myself, for myself and my practice, so I could help my clients with these deeper issues that weren't getting resolved with fitness, exercise training, and Feldenkrais, and learned very quickly that there is a whole world of emotions, physiological traumas that get stuck in not just our bones, but in our tissues, in our organs, in our fluids, in our fascia, in the way we have movement patterns. So that really opened up my eyes to so many things. And then I just kind of went full steam ahead, learning from all of the mentors in that field. And that was 2008. So I went from 1993 to 2008, just studying. And then it was really in, I would say 2009-ish, 10, that I really was like, okay, time to practice, time to work with people, worked with tons of people in private practice, groups, teaching, educating. And then in about 2014, 16, 15, somewhere around there, everything went online. In addition to some of the group workshops that I did do, but everything went online. That's how you and I found each other, right? Through Podcast Worlds. And so now I am the owner, founder of two online courses that teach people about their nervous systems, how to heal their nervous system, how to restore regulation to the nervous system, not just from a nervous system somatic point of view, but also from a movement point of view, a rewiring point of view, and your neuroplasticity point of view. And I bring all my stuff, the Feldenkrais, the somatic experiencing, deep education into my work, as you know. So that's a nutshell of what I do and what keeps me out of trouble.
I love it. You did good. You did really well there. You summarized it really well. I do want to point out, because I think what's so unique, there's so many things that are unique to the work that you do, but being an avid mover myself and having done lots of healing modalities over the years, I was trained that to heal the human body, it was often a manual therapy of some kind. I was in a room with a PT. I was getting, work done with the Graston technique, like 10,000 things where someone was working on my body. And what I love so much about your work, and what I think is so empowering about your work, is you are literally giving the tools to the client to practice on themselves. And so there is no one out there sort of doing the work on your body. It's the work that you're doing
With
within your
yourself.
body, and you're giving them that pathway. And
Yeah.
you and I, go ahead, sorry.
No,
You want to
no,
add to
go ahead.
that? Okay. You and I have had a lot of conversations about the nervous system over the
Yes.
years on this
Yes.
podcast, in
Yes.
summits, and elsewhere. And we have kind of approached the conversation from a lot of different angles. We have talked about the fundamental workings of the nervous system. We have talked about stress, macro and micro, and how that impacts the nervous system.
Mm.
We have talked about how nervous system dysregulation affects behavior change. And so today we kind of thought we would take a little bit of a different angle and really kind of lean into this exercise
Yeah.
piece and how, because really, and I'm really curious to hear, I'm really anxious to hear what you, not anxious, curious is the right word, to hear what you have to say about this, because exercise, my understanding is that, and my experience is that it can absolutely help us to process stress and regulate the system.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, if the system is hyper dysregulated, it can prevent us from doing that work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm really interested to know sort of how do we resolve that conundrum? And I'm sure some of it you're going to say is education, right? Learning
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
impact.
Well, and I think this, I'll start with a story that isn't around the trauma piece. When I was learning Feldenkrais in 2004 to 07, if anyone knows anything about Feldenkrais at the surface level, one thinks it is about gentle, soft, slow developmental movements, and that's partially true. But it's also an applied martial art. Like if you go to the highest levels of Feldenkrais, you're doing judo rolls and you're doing handstands, headstands. You are doing intense squat maneuvers where you're on all fours. It's very human movement, Ido Portal, which I know you know. Like it can be very physical.
Yeah.
But because in a lot of our trainings, the people in those trainings were deconditioned and frailer, and and this is because they were seeking out a movement practice that wasn't asking them to like crunch and core and squat and push and pull. There was kind of this preponderance to have really low level movement and subtle movement in that world. And so there was this thought that Feldenkrais is this slow thing that is just for old ladies. And that's not the true. But what occurred is that there became this, I don't know what the word would be, Courtney, but this like disdain, that might be too strong of a word, for intense exercise. That's bad. Like we can't push our bodies because it's overtaxing and it's too intense and it needs to be slow and aware.
Yep.
And what occurred, I think, in some of these mind-body things is it pulled this thought that, oh, well, this is for the easy stuff. And then if you want exercise that's really intense, you go see the CrossFit person.
Mm-hmm.
So I say that because when I got into the trauma work, there was no talk about the importance of being vigorous with our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. You can't talk about everything in one methodology. But what would happen is you'd have people come in who had, let's just say, complex PTSD. Their capacity was so small.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. They're swimming in a soup of survival stress or traumas. They can't even leave the house because they have so much fear. They have sensitivities, any blip in their heart rate, and they think that something is wrong. And so that work was just like, okay, we just have to get someone not just stable, but able to even experience the tiny blip of activation in their system and then work with it.
Yeah.
And so what started to happen as I got more steeped in learning about this trauma work from the somatic point of view, and I started being in trainings, Courtney, is I noticed a lot of the, I hate to say it, but a lot of the high-level trainers, a lot of the students, a lot of practitioners who were in training were just so physically unwell. And no vigor, like just, and I'm not the way I was when I was an athlete, but I can hold my own. I can exercise, I can sweat, I can lift. Not to the degree that I used to, but it's there, and I have that impulse to be active.
Yeah.
And it showed me, okay, there's a missing piece here. We still need to talk about exercise, but not from a Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of
Mm.
point of view, or getting that perfect beach body, from a view of health and wellness. And then I'll say one more thing, and then we'll dig into this, is my master's degree. When I did my master's in Australia in science, applied biomedical science, I was given the task. I didn't want it, but it was the only thing that was available because of the funding.
Yeah.
I was given the task to put together an intervention study with older adults, so 65 to 85.
Okay.
And they had to be on 2 different diets. It was a dietetics study. It was funded by the Meat and Livestock Association of Australia.
Oh, interesting.
Because at that time, red meat consumption was going down because people were being given the fear that red meat is bad for your heart and cholesterol, which we know is not true.
Right.
And so they were trying to beef up their product.
No pun intended. Yeah.
No pun intended. And so I had to put these great, amazing older humans through an intervention of high intensity weight training with 2 different diets, one high protein in the form of red meat, and the other just normal diet. But what I did, when you do any kind of research, is you have to do a literature review. You have to go into the back literature and look and see who's done these kinds of studies. And I came across these amazing studies by a woman by the name of Maria Fiatarone. She's an American that is based now in Australia. And she was the first scientist, to say, we're going to see what happens if we put these elderly, frail people into a situation of high intensity strength training. And like high intensity is 8 RM. So, which is like you fatigue at 8 reps, which is a lot of weight. It's a lot of intensity. And what she found is, and this is a huge macro presentation of this, is that you could take someone who is frail and osteoporotic, someone with kidney failure, someone with mental illness, someone with congestive heart failure, and put them into this high intensity resistance training. At the minimum, the lowest study was 1 time a week, Courtney, 1 set. And their markers of health just skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And that was the first moment where it was like, oh, wow, humans don't have to age in the way that we think they do.
Yeah.
They actually have the capacity to have intensity at them, pushed at them, or exerted through their bodies, and the body wants it.
Yeah.
It doesn't want, I've got like my matches here. It doesn't want 1 pound bicep curls. It wants like 30 pounds. Like, can you pump that out? Especially at that age, it needs the stimulus. And so that was interesting to me, because I was given that study I didn't want it. I was trying to get out of the exercise science world and study more biochemical stuff like omega-3 fatty acids I was interested in. But, blessing in disguise, I then had to look at this literature, and it was conclusive. So now when I do work with my students and clients, my students online, I say, if you don't know why you should heal your trauma, do it so that you can be active.
Yeah.
Do it so that you can be that 55-year-old, 65-year-old, and you do have the rigor and the vigor to go to the gym, because that will not save you, but it will make it so that your comorbidities and your just general health, your health is higher going into older age.
Yeah.
And people they don't attach those 2 together. They think, I have anxiety, I got to fix the anxiety. And I'm like, well, let's look at this a little more broad scale, because a lot of folks who have, let's just use that term, anxiety, they won't exercise because when their heart rate goes up, it freaks them out. It is it's overcoupled with fear. And so part of this work is not only working with your traumas and these old patterns and these memories that are hard and these sensations, it's also being able to separate when your heart rate goes up high this is good because you're exercising versus your heart rate is going up high because you're in a threat response.
Right.
So
And
I
so how
just
do
threw a
you,
whole bunch at you. So I'll
yeah,
stop
how do
talking.
you discern between the two? Like, is
Yeah.
that something that somebody uses like their executive center to sort of discern between? Like, this is not anxiety. This is actually, I'm in a safe environment. I'm on the treadmill. And of course, my heart rate is going up
Yeah.
right now.
I would say yes, there needs to be some top-down functioning, executive functioning, reasoning with yourself.
Yeah.
And again, this is where I wouldn't say to, and this is where I wouldn't say to someone, just go exercise for 30 minutes because you have to. But that's what a lot of prescription is with
Right.
exercise. Like the doctor will say you need to go and exercise 3 times a week at this intensity, and the person doesn't understand what that means, but they go, okay,
Yeah.
and they do it, and they're like, I'm terrified, I can't do this.
Yeah.
But I've had,
Or
go
they
ahead.
induce more stress because they're doing it at such an intensity that they're actually causing a bigger problem.
Exactly.
Exercise can traumatize. I've been in that camp,
Yes.
right? Like I think a
Yes.
lot of athletes have been in that camp.
Yes.
And so we have, like what I heard you say earlier, which I really loved, is just talking. You didn't say it this way, but what I
Mhm.
heard is there's almost like a capacity spectrum
Yep.
that we have to honor.
Yep.
That your stress load is different from my stress load. What
Mhm.
you have dealt with in the past is different than what I've dealt with in the past.
Yep.
And we have to take that all into consideration when we are entering the waters of
Yes.
exercise. And sometimes that's really hard to figure out for yourself, which is why there's wellness professionals in the world who actually help you to kind of titrate that approach.
Yeah. And that concept of titration is so key because when you're trained in fitness, you do know that. Like you're not going to give someone like these older adults that I worked with, we didn't start them off on 8 reps max on the first
Sure.
day, right? That we had a warm up, they had to learn. They did it on low weight so that their motor system could
Online.
could understand. And I mean that if you know anything about the way muscles work, some of the biggest strength gains are not because the muscle is getting stronger, it's because the
The
neural
nervous system.
pathways are getting stronger.
I wish people understood that. Yes. Like such a great argument for strength training.
Yeah, because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, look at me, I've just increased 30 pounds on my leg press, and then how come a month out I can't put it up another 30 pounds? It's like, well,
Yeah.
it's because those first beginnings are the connections of the wires coming together. But it's the same when you're working with the nervous system and you're working with the basics that we teach is at the beginning, and this isn't everyone because everyone's different, but for some people, they're floored in a good way by how potent just learning how to orient is and learning how to follow impulse and feel the body and feel the breath without changing it. But then they reach this plateau, I guess you could call it, or this capacity where they keep doing those things, but nothing's changing. It's like, well, now you got to add another stimulus.
Right.
Now you have to add another goal, if you will, or
Layer
another
of intensity. Yeah.
to focus on. So I'm thinking of a friend right now whom had trouble all her life being active and struggled with weight and all these things, and also autoimmune and tons of abuse
Yeah.
growing up. And we were out in a world where we were hiking, and she went off on her own hike, and it was a beautiful resort area with all different trails for different levels, which was great. And she came back after this walk and she said, I'm so proud of myself. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, I found myself on this trail and I could feel my heart race. This is how you know, racing. When someone says their heart is racing,
Mhm.
that's usually connected with survival stress and anxiety.
Okay.
Like if someone is intensely working a cardio workout, a person won't say, correct me if I'm wrong, Courtney,
Yeah.
my heart is racing. They'll say, my heart rate is high.
Right.
This is intense.
Yeah.
Right? Perceived exertion of 10 out of 10. I can't talk, all these ways that we perceive exertion when we're exercising. And so she stopped and just felt it. And then she brought in feel the feet, orient, I'm okay. This is just my heart working because I'm going up this hill.
Yeah.
And then she was okay.
Yeah.
And so what I think happens, because I worked in fitness for like 15 years, I think what occurred, and I didn't have the awareness of this, is a lot of people didn't come back because they didn't know that they were having reactions to their fitness regimen, but they didn't have the language or the knowledge to even track their quote unquote racing heart. They're just like, this doesn't feel good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I wrote out many, many, many exercise programs on those little pieces of paper with the boxes, and they have to come in and they tick, and then they put them in the little file folder at the, at the counter of the gym. And the first few weeks of the year, like they'd be in ticking off the boxes, and then you'd have to go and clean them because the box just gets really full.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, so-and-so hasn't been in since March. So-and-so hasn't been in since last year of February. I guess I'll take this out.
Yeah.
And it was more than 50%. I would say it was more like 80, if I'm really generous, 85% of the people just didn't come back.
Yeah.
And I really do think, Courtney, it was because there was no internal guiding to how to navigate these uncomfortable feelings, it's really sensations, and then the feelings that might come with that.
Yeah.
I can't
Because
do this.
exercising really is, especially when you're just getting back into it or maybe building a habit for the first time.
Yeah.
It's so uncomfortable. I mean,
Yeah.
you are literally walking into an invitation of discomfort.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And what I hear you saying is if we don't have the sort of the clarity and the sort of the wherewithal to kind of talk ourselves through that this is actually helpful discomfort, not harmful discomfort,
Yes.
then we just retreat and we just say that's not good for me, or it didn't feel right, I felt unsafe. And maybe we're not even using that language in our brain, but that's how we're responding.
Yeah. It would be really interesting to like do a retrospective study to find out like those who, I don't like to use the word fail, but let's use it, who failed at their fitness regimens, how many of them had stored trauma and stored survival stress, and that was the culprit that led them to not go back to ever do that thing again, because that intensity mimicked the intensity of being screamed at or abused or even just being put on the spot and being uncomfortable. Like that is a huge thing because I love going to the gym. I was brought up at the racquetball club. My dad played squash like every night, much, to my mother's dismay. And so he'd take me down there, and I just like, this was when a kid could just go and do whatever they wanted at a gym when their dads or moms were playing, whatever they were doing. And I'm just so comfortable in that genre of being around all sorts of people sweating and grunting and seemingly looking scary and all. And I just kind of watch, and like, there's a lot of people here who are not in their body.
Yeah.
They're sure there's a pool of sweat under them on the recumbent bike, but they're like crooked and they're just going, or like the worst, Courtney, is the person on the leg press and they're just looking at their phone as they're pressing.
Oh, right. Completely detached.
Completely detached. And one could say, well, at least they're getting out, and yes, and they're doing something and their heart rate is getting up, but it's not building a bridge to your own personal internal capacity and strength. Because if you really go into a solid, and it doesn't have to be crazy, but a nice moderate fitness routine, and you are in it and you're listening and you're breathing and and you rest when you need to, and you take a drink of water when you need to, and you look around and you watch, like it's a lovely experience. It can be. But I think most people go in and they're afraid. And they're looking around, who's watching me?
I think we also find a lot of evidence for what we're looking for. Like, I hate being here. I don't like movement. I don't like weight training. I don't like whatever it is. And if that's the attitude we go into it with, of course, we're going to find evidence for that. So okay. So I just want to make this really sort of tangible for listeners, because for the person who is listening that really does understand the value of exercising, but has really struggled to build a practice of it, what you are proposing is that fundamentally there could be an issue at the nervous system level, and there likely is. And so to enter that gateway of building a regular exercise program, a couple things to take into consideration. Number one, that you enter with the proper dosage.
Yes.
You aren't going all out into something that is far too ambitious for your level of capacity.
Yeah.
I also hear you saying that we have to go into it awake, staying conscious and really present to the sensations in our body.
Mm-hmm.
And using our executive center to kind of coach ourselves through, this is not dangerous.
Yeah.
I'm safe.
Yeah.
I'm simply exerting myself.
Yeah.
And what else? And then ultimately we're expanding our capacity for that level of discomfort,
Mm-hmm.
which then we can eventually move further down that line of intensity
Yes.
as we build that capacity. But if we do it prematurely, it can just add more stress to the system.
100%. And what also occurs when you mentioned the piece about capacity and feeling is when you are tuned into your internal system and you can feel your joints and you can feel your muscles and you're not just there in a rote robotic way,
Mhm.
your likelihood of being injured is so much less.
Yeah.
Because you're not disconnected. And this doesn't mean that you can't exert a little extra, but you don't push it when something says, don't do that.
Right.
Right. So, just the other day I was doing a leg extension machine at the gym and there was a little pain on the lateral side of my kneecap, and this is my better knee. And
Dang
of
it.
course, that part of me is like, just come on, it's just one more set, just do it.
Yeah.
And I'm getting better as I get older. It's like, nope, walk away from the machine.
Yeah.
Right? Just walk away because there's probably something tight in your pelvis or tight in the hip or something needs to be moved because you've been sitting all day and you didn't do enough to balance out things. Because if I had pushed, it's very likely that I could have strained something or a part of my meniscus, my ligaments, my cartilage, and then I'd be out for like weeks.
Right.
And that's the cool thing that I have found is that when you have that, we would call it interoception, which is something that, we teach and many people don't have. Even high-level athletes don't have interoception. It's wild, right? But when we have that as regular civilians, so to speak, and we go into this desire to become stronger, fitter, more able-bodied, more independent, because it's not just about physique, it's about independence into life. It just becomes it's different. It's not because of aesthetics, it's because of health. But to get to that can take some time when you've been driven through external goals and motivations that aren't for you, but are maybe for others.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been, I don't know if you've read Peter Attia's new book.
I haven't, but I have not read
You'll
it.
love it.
It's big.
But one of the concepts that he just so beautifully illustrates is kind of talking about this marginal decade, the last decade of your life.
Sure.
And when you really consider how you want to be living that final decade of your life, most people want to be mobile. They want to hike with their friends. They want to get on the floor with their grandkids. They want to still be able to get in and out of their car. And he talks about, in order to, let's just say that your marginal decade is going to be in your 80s, 90s, or beyond.
Yeah.
We have to have a ramp, like we have to have sort of a surplus of capacity to allow for the decline.
Yes.
And if we haven't addressed things like nervous system health, we're already starting in a deficit.
Yes.
And we will only continue to lose capacity as we age, as a natural byproduct of the aging process. So to do this work at any point that you're listening to this podcast or you get introduced to Irene's work is definitely an entry, whatever age you're at, enter it. But I think for those listening who are kind of whether they're younger or kind of in those midlife years, it is so important to build this so you have room for that decline.
And that's the crux, Courtney, because even people who I know whom are in the work that I do, they're not aware of this.
Yeah.
They're not building. And I think that's where connecting with this importance of building physical robustness and muscle and bone density and ligament health and spinal flexibility and joint flexibility, it's sort of not talked about or thought about in the trauma world.
Yeah. But it's all
Um,
capacity.
it's all about capacity. And I mean, I often say this thing, like, how many times do you hear of someone who just dies of old age? By that I mean up until the day a person dies, and I mean like old, like
Yeah.
past 80, they are doing their groceries, they're still driving their car, they're going up and down stairs. They don't need to push themselves up when they get out of a chair. They can get down to the floor. They can do all these things, right? That's very rare.
Mhm.
And as someone who has not been able to, say, walk for years at a time because of all my injuries, I sometimes wonder, and I have a feeling you've had an injury too that was quite debilitating at one point. Did you, like with your
Yeah,
back?
I really actually haven't
Haven't you?
until I would
Okay. All
say
right.
at this stage of my life, probably because of perimenopause, I'm experiencing more joint challenges and
Aches.
kind of like
Okay.
tendonitis and things like that that I've
Okay.
never contended with
Got
before.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think for me, at least personally, because I've been bedridden with orthopedic injuries,
Yeah.
it's like I never want to not be able to be mobile and take
Yeah.
care of myself and walk. And that drives me a bit more than I think the regular person who hasn't had that kind of dysfunction.
Mhm.
And so that's the part where it's like, nope, I never want to not be able to walk up and down stairs, to get out of my own bed, to shower myself.
Mhm.
But we know that that is the fate for so many people, especially in the Western world, especially in North America.
Yeah.
And I do think that's why Peter Attia is so passionate about it, because he's seen the repercussions
Yeah.
of metabolic syndrome, of dysfunction, of arthritis, of osteoporosis. Um, and I think a lot of the reason we're not taking care of our bodies is because we're not connected to our bodies.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's so we're so in our heads,
Yep.
and absorbing more information than we could ever possibly process. And
Yeah.
then wondering why, yeah, we aren't connected to the body or having trouble
Hmm.
connecting to the body.
Hmm.
I want to jump to this conversation
Sure.
because I really am so curious to hear what you
Yeah.
have to say about this,
Yeah.
about kind of issues in the tissues and how that
Oh.
relates to nervous system health.
Hmm.
So you had kind of mentioned in a voicemail that you left for me about seeing a correlation in sort of the stiffness of
Hmm.
people or even the elasticity of joints in terms of hypermobility and how that might relate to nervous system health.
Yeah. So, this is a controversial topic.
Yeah,
It's
okay,
crazy.
let's go for it.
But I have worked with people, more so my online students, so I hear their stories.
Yeah,
But one in particular I'm thinking about, her name is Elizabeth. I've done many talks with her online for my channel. And she's young, young in that she's probably only in her 30s, and but diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I think some bowel problems, and something that we would label as EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is like hypermobility of the joints. And it's said that this is genetic. Okay. However, she don't got it anymore.
oh,
You know?
interesting. Yeah,
And she's healthy, good relationships, eats well, all those things. But when she started doing one of my courses, it was primarily the 21-day nervous system tune-up.
yeah,
Slowly over about 6 months, and now I've known her for about 2 years, 2 to 3 years, gone. She can run up mountains, she can hike, she has capacity, whereas before she couldn't do any of these things. And so the hypermobility of her joints shifted as she be, as she started to gain more regulation. And this is the part that I think is very hard when we're new to this to wrap our heads around, is when our system is living in dysregulation. So if the sympathetic nervous system is on high fight, what we call fight
yeah,
flight, for no reason, there's really no threat. And then we also have this shutdown, we call it freeze response, where the system is going into conservation mode, low metabolism. The fight, flight, and freeze coalescing together creates a system that can't repair and regenerate.
mm,
For some people, they have this chronic stiffness, tension, armoring, like all that kind of stuff. But then the other side, this flip side, is the term in the somatic experiencing world is undercoupled and overcoupled. So somebody who is very tight and stiff, it's like everything is Velcro together in like armor suit. And then undercoupled is like they don't got no suit.
Yeah.
They got no boundary. And they're so flexible to the point where they don't even know where they start and where they end and where someone else begins. And then this is where you get people who will say, everyone just walks all over me. I'm always getting into shitty situations. I'm always getting into toxic situations. And it's almost as if, and of course, this isn't studied by a double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled study, but I've seen it enough times anecdotally to go, it's like that individual is translucent.
Yeah.
It's like there's no boundary of where they begin.
There's no me, like a identity of themselves.
Self, yeah. And then that comes, if I generalize, from living a life where you have to kind of hide yourself, or you have to let down your guard, because if you don't, you're going to get in trouble. Like there's so many ways in which little people, children, protect themselves by either guarding too much or letting it all down. And then not the final thing, but the other thing I'll say to this hypermobility is we need healthy nervous system regulation. We need the nervous system to be regulated so that we can repair and regenerate tissue.
Yeah.
And stitch it back up, just like the gut lining stitches up every night due to wear and tear. And if you eat too much, or if you eat something that's doesn't agree with you, the lining breaks down and then you don't feel well. You get inflammation in the gut. That would be what happens with someone with, say, IBS or Crohn's. It's chronic all the time. With the tissues that aren't recovering or are hypermobile, it's almost like the system just doesn't know how to tighten those tissues so that they have that good elasticity.
Yeah.
And then it's like there's just this flaccidness.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah. And you know what I hear in this is, because I always think in images, that when there's a dysregulated nervous system, like two things, and they're always ends of the spectrum, right? Yeah. When we're dysregulated, it's like we live at one end of the spectrum or the other. Yeah. But we either build an armory of our body, which is that really tight, rigid, like don't let anything in, don't feel anything, or we dissolve our stability, which is kind of like where all that lucidness, I think, comes in the joints. And at least that's what I hear.
Yes. And there's no, like, it's not like textbook, because everyone's a bit different. But when I was working in private practice and doing touch work, those that had more of the representation of this undercoupled, no boundary, it's like you would touch them and it's like nobody was there.
Yeah.
And it's the tissue would be very doughy. Very soft isn't the right word, but like there was no aliveness in it. And it's like you could press it and it would indent. Right. And so there wasn't enough vigor. Well, this is what's interesting. Like we need some sympathetic activation in order to get energy and to move. And so when we're stuck in these more low level, we would call them in the fancy term, high tone dorsal of the parasympathetic, like this shutdown, this collapse. One of the reasons why folks have trouble, to go back to the exercise thing, exercising, is they literally have no sympathetic drive. There's no cortisol. There's no adrenaline. The kidney and adrenals are pooped. Or burnt out. This ties into autoimmune and chronic fatigue. Usually those juices from the kidney and adrenals are just dried up because they've been living in so much threat and stress, maybe from in utero or before. And so you get this tissue that's just, there's no life to it. And it's just interesting to me that humans can represent so differently when maybe their circumstance and their upbringings were very similar. Why one person ends up with this versus, say, a more mental-based illness, we could say it's genetic, but I think that's an oversimplification because we just don't know.
Right? We don't know. And, I've always, and again, this is just my theory, but I've always believed like, even just with the conversation of inflammation,
Yeah.
everyone experiences inflammation differently. Some people get headaches. Some people get like a pain in their knee that's had issues over the years. It presents itself in so many different ways. And I have always sort of just thought that we feel the pain and we feel the effects where the tissues are a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
The systems that are a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
And of course, again, for various reasons, we're all designed differently that way. And who knows why, But
we don't know. I mean, we can know and we don't know. I mean, sometimes a person is like, I always get a flare on that joint because that's where I had that injury when I was young. And it's just got a little more weakness to it. I've got those joints all over my body, right? Just from breaks and sprains and strains and impacts.
Yeah.
And that's where having a bit more awareness around this is so important. And then knowing how to work with it, because as you mentioned at the beginning of our talk, like it can be easy to just go to a manual therapist and they just like friction the heck out of that tendon that's sore, let's just say, and tight. And maybe you just need to put some hands on your gut or your heart space or these diaphragms where your lungs are, because there's so much tightness.
Yeah.
And that's causing that old injury to flare in, say, your ankle. And you're trying to treat it with, a well-intentioned physical therapist. But man, what if there's something that's holding on, that's making that tense somewhere else?
And it just needs a release.
It just needs breath. It needs ease. It needs the system to not be fighting. And it might have nothing to do with that joint. It might have to do with something else. Back to the issues in the tissues. It's like, well, the issue is in that tissue, but maybe the issue stems from holding in of anger or holding in of tears, or a grief that it's just too hard. You don't want to feel it, but it's ramping the system up in stress.
It's so interesting. My son came home, I don't know, this was earlier this year, and he said, Mom, did you know that drunk drivers are actually far more likely to survive an accident than people who are not drinking? And I was like, well, that kind of makes sense, right? Because when you're not drinking, you're anticipating that collision. Everything is tense. And then, of course, that doesn't bode well when you need your body to be a little bit relaxed to withstand an impact.
Yeah.
And the opposite being true for someone who's been heavily drinking.
It's true. Yeah,
and I think that in my own life, I think that I can definitely relate so much to that anticipatory protection, right? That I approached my training that way. And that's why I said at the beginning that I think training for a lot of people that I have worked with in the industry, certainly other trainers and movement experts, have had the experience at some point of movement or exercise programs being traumatizing to their systems, because we aren't extending ourselves the grace of kind of oscillating our training or kind of giving some flexibility to it when we're handling higher stress loads.
Yeah.
And case in point, when I had my son, a few years after I had him, so many things going on in my life. And I was training twice a day, 7 days a week, super intense. And then I started entering perimenopause, and it was just like this soup for disaster.
What's going on?
Right?
Yeah.
And then I started backing off, giving myself that grace to sort of approach my exercise program differently. It's not that I don't do intensity, but I don't do it as often.
Yeah.
And I'm really calculated in checking in with myself about where my system is to be able to handle this.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel, I think, softer, both like internally and externally. Like, it's not a bad thing when I say that word. Like, for me, it's what needed to happen in order for me to get to a place where it's like, I can still train, and I really need to gauge how often I go to those intense places. I still go there.
That's intense, training twice a day.
Yeah.
That time.
And I think when you train with someone who is male, who all they do for, and I'm not saying, I have a male trainer right now who I absolutely adore.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not a sexist comment, but I think sometimes men aren't necessarily experienced with the fluctuations that we go through in a month. Certainly what childbearing does to the female body, or perimenopause and menopause do to the female body. And I think when you're experiencing that, so often we are getting loud and clear those messages to
Yeah.
back off or
Yeah.
to approach it in a different way. And when we
Yes.
don't give ourselves that permission,
Yeah.
we get really injured.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, you know this, but the male has a 24-hour cycle and we have a 28-day cycle when it's healthy,
Right.
right? In terms of hormones. And it really, that's been something I've had to really grapple with,
Yeah.
is it made no difference when I was in my 20s where I was in my cycle and training, because I was frozen. I was functionally frozen. And it's taken me some time to be okay when I'm in those first, say, 7 days of the cycle to be like, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to go for a walk.
Yeah.
And it took a while to be like, I should be going to the, gym. And
Yeah.
same with like, if you're feeling a little sick or run down, like back in the day, I'd just keep going. But now it's like, no, my body my system needs to rest and it needs to
Yeah.
recover. It needs to repair, and throwing it a 40-minute, even low intensity aerobic session is not going to help those immune building pieces do their job, because there's going to be this added stress that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that's interesting, is when we become more interoceptive and aware of our system, we can tell when we're a bit worn out
Mm-hmm.
and pushing it a little more than we should. And you can mitigate a lot of illness if you catch it early.
Yeah. It's so true.
It's so true. And the way that I can dodge a bullet, so to speak, if I'm feeling that sore, scratchy throat, that is often a sign that you're about to get something, it's monumentally different than before. It'd be like, oh, I'm sick, even that mindset, right?
Yeah.
But now it's like, no, I need to not do this thing. I need to have a bath. I need to eat some better food. And I just need to just go into neutral
Yeah.
with my system. And more often than not, the next day I wake up and gone.
This is going to sound crazy, but I think one of the ways for me and I know everyone has different relationships with the scale, but because I have pretty consistent patterns in the way that I eat and the way that I sleep and take care of myself. And when my weight goes up and I see that inflammatory response, I see it on the scale before I see it in my heart rate on it, doing some kind of cardio before I actually even feel ill in my body.
Interesting.
There's just a pattern that isn't normal. And so that's my cue. Like, maybe I should back off a little bit today. And if I don't, I'll get full blown sick within 24 hours.
Interesting.
It's so interesting. All right, I want to ask you this because I get this question a lot.
Yes.
Because what we're really talking about is learning how to gauge the push and the pull.
Yep.
And I think that's such a tricky space for people, especially when they have a dysregulated nervous system, but also when people have made a habit out of sort of negotiating discomfort, right? So they are always giving themselves permission to back out of discomfort, even though we need some of it. So how do we navigate that?
That's a great question, Courtney. So first thing, trial and error.
Yeah.
You're not always going to get it right in the first.
I love it. Experiment. Yes.
The second thing, at the beginning, let's just say someone is like, okay, this makes sense. I want to work on my nervous system. And I also want to continue to exercise.
Yeah.
In whatever way it is, or start. At the beginning, put more weight on pulling away.
Yeah.
And listening. But then, and by that I mean like focus more on the gentler practices, building capacity, the things that I teach, that you know about. But then there comes, I'm going to do this with my hands for those that are just listening to audio. I've got my hands side by side. It's like you want to move forward with the nervous system regulation first. And then when you've got some capacity, then push a little bit with the intensity. Let's say the exercise routine.
Yeah.
And then don't change a damn thing for like a month or two.
Yeah.
Just keep doing the same thing, even though there might be this temptation to do an extra thing or just keep it so routine, like you're brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
And then when you stabilize and you find that it's just like walking your dog, no
Your
big
new
deal.
normal. Yep.
Then add a little more to that exercise, push a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
but push with awareness.
Yeah. And just because we push doesn't mean we can't pull, right? Like we can
Exactly.
push and we can definitely, if we find that isn't working for us, we can pull right back.
Exactly. But what this reminds me of, it reminds me of something actually that one of my mentors, Kathy Kane, said to us in training one day. I think it's okay if I share this. She was talking about, because she doesn't do private practice anymore. And so she had to refer all of her clients out to other practitioners.
Okay.
And time goes on, and then those people would check in with her, checks in with them, how you doing? Yeah. I'm good. And they'd say, while the practitioner I'm working with is great, I actually had more building and more healing with you because you actually you pushed me over to the point where actually it was a bit of a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But that push made it such that I realized I could handle it and I could recover.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is very different than saying to someone who's never done any deadlifts, just go push and deadlift.
Yeah, go lift 500 pounds, right?
No.
We're
So
not
you
doing
got to
that.
also have some discernment here.
Sure.
But when it comes to the nervous system work, sometimes you do need to push it a little bit to see the capacity. And if I think about my husband, Seth, who I talk about a lot and we do interviews together, when I met him, he hated exercise.
Yeah.
Hate. Despised it. He thought I was mentally ill because of how much I liked to move. Seriously, Courtney. He's like, you have an addiction problem. I'm like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Now he's shifted to the point where he can take himself into our little gym and do a workout and do all the things out of his own free will. And he knows how to push his intensity, but he had to build up to that.
Yeah.
By having a trainer, by me literally pulling him out of the house like he was a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
And so I share that because I had to actually poke him to the point where he didn't hate me. Of course not,
Yeah.
But he was pissed.
Yeah. He was resistant.
And that is maybe a game that you might need to play with your own psyche.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you don't have a partner, but you got okay, let's just try this.
Yeah.
So the discomfort has to come, I think, in very calculated doses. It shouldn't be to the point where you're harming yourself.
Yeah.
But it is this trial and error, because if you don't push, your capacity will not build.
Yeah. I want to share this with you. The other night I went to, I'm a big Latin dancer. It's like my soul food.
Love it.
And a friend of mine was teaching sort of in this, we call it Caris Park. It's this big outdoor park.
Yeah.
And she was offering a public class. Anybody could come.
Fun.
So I asked my son, who's 13, right, to come with me. And we dance all the time at home.
Yep.
But to watch him in that environment, it's like he froze.
Yeah.
And he was so uncomfortable and angry, like he didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And we just, I made sure that he didn't have to partner with anybody else. Like I was looking for ways to make him feel comfortable.
Of course.
We danced together and we kept practicing to the point that he got pushed out of his comfort zone.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, because I told him, you don't ever have to come with me again, but you have to get through this class.
Yeah. Good for you.
And like halfway through the class, he said, I'll come with you again next Monday.
Aww.
And he was like totally moving and grooving by the end of the class. Yeah. And it was just because I created a container where I was like, you are safe. You are with me. I'm not going to make you dance with anybody else. Mm-hmm. But we're going to stay in this because we committed to it. Mm-hmm. And then you can make a decision afterwards. And to see what blossomed in him in just that 45 minutes was huge.
It's huge. That is a great example for personal process, but also those who have kids. Yeah. Because I think there's become this situation where we're afraid to make our kids a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it's actually really important. And I find that it's just not happening to the degree that it was when you and I were growing up. And so that makes me so happy, because someone might be saying, oh, well, he's following his impulse. And so this is where it gets confusing for some people, where they're like, well, you say that the kids should learn how to follow their, and it's like, true.
Yes.
And then this is a social thing. This is beyond the first 3 years of life of nervous system learning co-regulation and self-regulation. Because we do need to push a little bit in those contexts because we just won't grow and learn.
Right. And I've seen him in private how he behaves. And then
Yeah.
to know that we were in a public arena where
Yeah.
all his skateboarder friends go by and he was like
Yeah.
in this sort of fishbowl
So
of
good.
observing, I think that's what freaked him out.
Yeah.
And so once we just stayed with it and he got past all of that, he had a great time.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And he's got a cool mom.
Oh, well, I don't know if he thinks so, but
Oh,
I like to
he
think
wouldn't
so.
go back if he didn't think mom was cool. But yeah, that's such an important story because that shows us how that discomfort and that mindset and that fear for many people will keep them from pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
And you know what? Maybe he gets there. He's like, I hate this.
Right. And I was open to that. Yep.
Right. And so the difference there, because this is where we get childhood situations where it is abusive, it's like, no, you have to do this again.
Right. Exactly.
And so the choice is super important, but it's just like food. It's like, just try it once.
Yep.
As opposed to, I don't like that. Well, you haven't tried it. Just try it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you never know. Right.
You never know. You never know. I love it. Okay. So I just want to share with listeners because we've covered a lot here and you are gearing up to do your next launch of Smart Body, Smart Mind, which is a 12-week guide. It is guided. It's self-guided, but it's also that first 12 weeks is guided with you and Seth and your team.
Yep.
Would just share a little bit more about that with listeners, sort of the opportunity that is.
Yeah, well, it's called Smart Body, Smart Mind. It's been around for quite a while now. This fall, this autumn, it'll be the 14th time we've run it.
Amazing.
And it is, I like to call it more these days, Courtney, it's a 12-week curriculum.
Love it.
Because people get a bit worried that, what if I can't finish it in 12 weeks? I'm going to say right now, I haven't met anybody who's finished it in 12 weeks.
Yeah.
Yourself included, I believe.
Yep. And you forever have access. So you don't have a timeline.
And you can't, and the reason why I state that is because we need to titrate, as we've been talking about, small doses, baby steps. Someone might say, well, Irene, if it takes longer, then why don't you just have it be longer? And the thing is everyone is different.
Yeah.
And so we would just be chasing this end point that never happens.
Yeah.
So we go live in semester for 12 weeks. It's really in the end close to 16 weeks because there's extra moderation in our forums from my team. But yeah, it is a full comprehensive online curriculum that teaches deep education, the level that I would have got in my trainings. I call them neurosensory exercises, practical exercises that are a culmination of my background in Feldenkrais, somatic experiencing, and working with early trauma and developmental trauma.
Yeah.
And then there are training calls with me that happen each week. There are Q&A calls with my husband, Seth, who's also a colleague. And it is, from what I've seen, probably the gold standard for online courses for restoring regulation to the nervous system, which then gives you, the person, the opportunity to work on traumas that are stuck. So we don't ask you as a participant, what are your traumas?
To share, right, of course.
There's none of that. If anything, that's not even talked about unless you ask a question to us about something specific. It's really about building capacity, growing education, and learning how to be a master of your body.
It's self-healing.
It's self-healing. Is it everything a person will need? Probably not. But for some people, it is.
Yeah.
Like myself personally, because of all my orthopedic injuries, I got to see some osteos and chiros and massage people because of all my tissue. Yeah. But not everybody had that history. Yeah. And so we've had people from all walks of life, 20 years old up to 80 years old, people who have no understanding of their body. They dive in and they just get addicted to learning about themselves. Yeah. And it's really cool. Um,
Can
and what
we
else?
pause? I want to pause here too
Yeah,
and just say one thing
yeah,
because, and I think largely credit to the work that you're doing in the world. Um, Nervous system health is becoming more of a hot topic,
yes, it
right?
is.
And I mean, I look right and left every day and I'm seeing all these programs. I think I
Yeah,
saw one the other day that was like exercise based, like nervous system work. I don't even know what it was, but it just the
right.
advertising and the marketing of it just made me
Yes,
really feel like they just packaged these
yes,
words over something
yes.
that has nothing to do with the nervous
Yep.
system. And so I just want to be really clear that the level of nervous system work that you do is so top notch and
Mhm,
so much deeper and thorough
mhm.
than 99.9% of the programs that are out there. And I always say this, I'm very honest about it. I am an affiliate for your
Yep.
program. I have been through the program multiple times. I have known you and been interviewing you on this show and elsewhere for, I think we're going on like 8 years.
7, 8 years, I know. It's
Um,
crazy.
I have so many students who have been through your program, and yeah, I'm just a really big
Yeah.
believer in the caliber of what
Yeah.
you offer.
Thank you, Courtney. And you know that it's taken me some years to really own that because at the beginning I didn't know, right? It was an experiment.
Sure.
I put stuff online because it was very clear to me in private practice that me being with someone for an hour a week, it was nice, but man, we need way more than that,
Right.
more
You
than
need to reach.
I can
Yes.
give and more than a person can afford.
Yeah.
Like there was at the height of my private practice career, I had some clients that had been seeing me for 3 to 4 years, once a week without fail.
Yeah.
Do the math at
Yeah.
$200 a pop before
Yeah.
tax. And so I will address that. Like the cost of Smart Body, Smart Mind is just under it's $2,000 US.
Mhm.
It seems like a lot, and it is a lot if you can't afford food. So
Sure.
don't do this if you can't feed yourself. But if you look at it in the grand scheme of what a person would put towards constant therapy, constant other things, it doesn't compare because you keep doing this over and over again. And then some people ask, well, if it's effective, why do you have to keep doing it over and over again? And my answer to that is, well, when a baby is born, you don't just hold them once
Mhm.
to teach them regulation.
Yeah.
It's this constant caring and tending and practicing and being and attuning and teaching and learning. And then eventually they become a full-fledged little person who can handle their own and is regulated. But that takes time. And so if we didn't have that growing up, um, and this is where everyone's different. Some people, they might need, all they need is a year of the work intensely and they're good to go. Others, because of their severe history of abuse and neglect and their chronic illnesses, they might be working with this stuff for 6, 7 years, right?
And life is dynamic. Stuff is
Yeah.
getting thrown at us that we never could have seen coming. So you could be regulated after this year, after this round of this program, and then something comes at you next year that completely
Throws
throws
you
you off
off.
kilter.
Yeah.
So to have the ability to circle back
Yeah.
and embed yourself back into that community, I just think is immense.
Yeah. We have people who have said, if it wasn't for this, these are older alumni who
Yeah.
would have been your genre. Um, if it wasn't for this, I would have been a mess the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And that just shows how important it is in our current times, at least, to have internal regulation and awareness because
Yeah.
we can't predict what's going to occur in the outside world.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with world events. It could be, the death of a loved one,
Yeah.
an accident, like shit happens.
Illness. Yeah. So many things.
And how regulated we are and able to listen to attune to ourselves will give us the ability to know what steps to take or when not to take a step.
Yeah.
So it really, we've had thousands of people go through this curriculum from
Yeah.
all over the world. And I'm super proud of it. And it's
You should
just,
be.
it's, I think, just supposed to be there
Yeah.
in the world right now.
Yeah.
And then of course, if people have questions, we have tons of FAQs.
Yeah.
on the site and all these things.
Yeah. And you have so many free resources. So if
Yes.
someone's listening to this and wants more information before committing, there are plenty of resources available. And I also just want to make a note too, because I know there's a lot of other coaches and professionals that listen to the podcast. And that I just feel that it is a responsibility of ours as healers and people who sort of walk alongside people in their healing process to have this level of education.
Yeah.
And so many people don't. I mean, there are so many wellness professionals that are highly dysregulated themselves because they don't understand this work.
Yeah.
And then how they are actually teaching people to be well just blows my mind. So I would just invite anyone who is a wellness professional to really consider this, not just for your own healing and improvement, but to really help your clients on such a deeper level.
Yeah. It will up level and completely change how you work with another human or a group of people.
Yeah.
And that's why I got into this work, is when I was doing Feldenkrais work, it was so clear that there was a big piece I was missing, and I was young enough to be okay accepting that I didn't know everything.
Yeah.
Or at least that was always my way. And so how do I say this? I think that this information and this practice, this isn't a fad.
Yeah.
It's like hand washing before surgery was implemented. It's like, it just has to happen.
Yeah.
And when we are working with people, and it doesn't mean you have to work with trauma.
Yeah.
Right? It just means you have the understanding that this could be something that a person is dealing with, because the amount of people, Courtney, that get dismissed by certain professionals when they say, I think this might be like from this old thing that happened to me when I was this age, and people will be like, that's impossible. That happened a long time ago. There are so many people that work with, even doctors are like that, nurses, like, that was in the past. There's no way that's impacting you now. Absolutely false. We know that is not true. And so it is important for us to, as professionals, teachers, for instance, to know this stuff so that we can at least have empathy and respect for a person's experience.
100%. I just had a student go through a finance course, and she said one of the big factors that she took into consideration was this person was trauma informed. They understood the nervous system, and she was like, sign me up, because it's not just for, teachers in the wellness space, but teachers in general. If you interact with people, this will benefit your life.
100%.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I adore you. I could talk to you all day long.
Me too.
I can't wait to see what we talk about next time.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being here, Irene.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story. And it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort. And with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.